Welcome once again to Along the Rio Grande. I'm George Torok, and many of you can tell from that familiar theme who our guests are today. We have in the studio Alex and Patty Apostolides, who are the hosts of The Edge of Texas on KTEP, and they're going to tell us a little bit today about storytelling and some of the lore of the Southwest and about the 15th anniversary of their radio program. Welcome to Along the Rio Grande.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Maybe we should talk a little bit at first about you folks and how you came to El Paso. Patty, I understand that you are a native El Pasoan.
I consider myself a native. I've been here since I was a year old, graduate of El Paso High, raised a family, and went back to UTEP and graduated in '69. And Alex and I have similar interests in archaeology. I was a member of the Archaeology Society in the late '70s when they started the Wilderness Park Museum. I was a part of that.
And Alex, you've been all over the place before.
All over around the block, yeah. Started San Francisco, World War II, LA, Mexico 7 years, Saudi Arabia 2 years, and came to El Paso in '74 and looked around and thought, if you have to live in the States, this is the best place to live that I've found.
And somewhere along the line, you got interested in storytelling and the history of this area?
Always have been. Always have been. Writing was always a sideline, no matter what else I was doing. I was doing magazine stuff, radio stuff. Good Lord, since the year one.
We got started when I heard that radio was a background that Alex had, and I was doing some reading for another writer and found that he wrote in the first person a story that needed to be in a male voice. So I invited Alex to join me on that program, and then he was writing stories for the Westerners Chorale, and I was the scribe publishing those, and we said, wouldn't this be great for a radio program? So we developed the format for Edge of Texas from that.
Well, New Mexico Magazine, when they had a real editor at that time, Westways and Arizona Highways were all very good to me. The stories, oh Lord, I've been a storyteller since I was 4 years old. And we're so rich in the Southwest in story material. Well, we're getting into our 15th year on the air with Edge of Texas. The story materials just doesn't dry up. I was going to do it for 1 year. I figured 1 year, yeah, that's it. And we're still slogging along every Saturday at 6 p.m., 88.5 FM. You know.
Well, we also do an interview with someone who either is making history or studying history or remembers it. And sometimes those interviews lead into additional story material because they share more than 10 minutes worth of interview.
Oh, yeah, like John West, who tells taller tales than I could dream of telling. We'll go right into a half-hour special at times. We had Mike Olson. Captain Mike was head of the Salvation Army here and is now in Kosovo restoring or repairing the mistakes the UN made. The Salvation Army, good people. We miss him. He'll be back, but that was good for half an hour.
Where did you get many of your early stories from? How did you start gathering material at the very beginning?
George, it's reading, 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 and I'm cursed with an eidetic memory. I never forget. I remember phone numbers that have been out of order for 20 years sort of thing, you know. And we decided to weave it together because we have such a rich tapestry here, beginning with prehistory. Just El Paso alone in the Southwest, 1540 Coronado, 1580 the Chamuscados, Espejo people, De Sosa, all passing through El Paso. 1598 naturally Oñate, going north, most of whose people were Jewish, by the way.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, converts. They were Marranos. Were escaping the Inquisition. There was a new empire up here to be conquered, and up they came. And what a job that must have been.
How do you research these stories? How do you gather the information? Does it matter whether the story is true or not? Does it have to be verified? Or
I verify everything. As an old reporter, you go back to source material for Oñate Villagra, who was the poet-journalist who accompanied them. A lot of the old Historical Society of New Mexico materials, Arizona Journal of Arizona History is priceless.
But George, he also brings into it, he makes the personality come alive.
Right.
Somewhere in the literature he's been able to find out if somebody's tall or short and how that affects their personality. And Alex brings those characters to alive. And what he does often is to use the voice that he might imagine that person would be. If you know he was a German, you put a German accent and things like that. I think one of our early stories and a whole series that developed came out of Alex's love of the desert in California, and my going with my dad here out into the desert and up into Elephant Butte, and a lot of that seemed to come together into stories that we call the Desert Rat series.
Well, I was 12 years for UCLA up in the Mojave in a place called Last Chance Canyon. Fabulous old guy, Walt Bickel, was my mentor where the desert's concerned. Had a third-grade education, but could read the land. And everything I think I know about the desert, I think I learned from Walt.
Is there something different about desert stories from the other types of things that you've come across?
Yeah, because you're thrown on your own. The desert's like the ocean. It'll carry you or it'll kill you. There's no malice, it's just the nature of the beast. And if you learn to read it, the same thing with the jungle. I've been all by myself for a month at a time, both in jungle and in desert. You go with the rhythms, and you survive, you know. Not only survive, you usually get fat, you know, coming out of it.
But not only that, George, it's the characters around here. You have characters here in the desert like Old Man Weatherby, and then you hear Alex tell a story about a character over there that had some of the same characteristics, and some of the same things happen with the klutzes in the desert, the ones who aren't prepared and the ones who have trouble. And those are the stories that we share and bring to life, and Alex gives many of them fictional names. Now, Walt Bickel is a real character, and he's a very interesting character that carries the theme of all the Desert Rat series.
He died 3 years ago. He'd gone up to the desert originally in 1932 with 2 years to live. That old man was like this. He was hard as nails, you know, and funny. But a lot of funny. So we look for, number one, the humor in any situation. Politics I tend to leave alone because I fail to see much humor in it. And one thing will lead to another. A whole series, we're projecting 12 books out of the radio program so far. Hell, all the basic research has been done, you know. But one series will be the Desert Rat series. These wonderful old Jacksonian, Jeffersonian Democrats who stand on their own 2 feet. And government is a dirty word to them. And they're self-reliant, they're self-sufficient.
There's a number of historical themes to your programs as well. Are there certain periods or certain eras that you tend to focus on?
Not necessarily, because each one has its own drama. The whole Spanish occupation of New Mexico. But with the Grand Chichimeca is what we cover from Chihuahua up to Utah, the Southwest per se. Did a whole series on the Arizona Rangers. Did a whole series on the Mormon migration from New York to Salt Lake, which in turn led to other stories about the Latter-day Saints. Everywhere you turn, there's stories.
What are some of the most recent stories that you do?
Well, we just got finished doing our Greater Utah Expedition of 1999. We just got back, and that was good for 2 programs in a row.
When we go on a trip, there are often people there that tell us stories.
Oh, yeah.
And they tell us stories about the area where we are. And some of those, because they're telling about a character in their own desert, which Utah and Arizona and Colorado are all desert countries that we go to, then those stories tie in with either the Desert Rat series or the Treasure Tales and the ghost stories. And you'll just be sitting on a porch somewhere watching the sunset, and somebody will tell you a story that just comes right into the radio program, and share that story with our listeners is the way we do that. Alex writes the story. He spends up to 5 hours just doing the actual typing. And you know, the research that has gone into that is extensive. Now I say it's, you know, like 40 years of history that's coming into our radio programs because he's studied so much history in the past. And as an archaeologist, he can bring in the Indian lore. And that's one of my favorite topics. You ask if we have themes. One of the themes is the Indian myths, where the Zuni and the Navajo and the all of the Indians, the Hopi and the Tewa, they bring this world from the other worlds, and then they have their stories of how, for instance, how Snail brought water is an interesting little story, and how the reason is that Snail now has a trail of water behind him is because he's the one who brought the water and started the rivers and the lakes that we have, because he had to drag the bottle and it made a hole in the bottom, and when he brought the water up from the underneath of the ocean, it created rivers and lakes. And it's a beautiful little story, and I get to do the voice of Snail because he's so little. And then the other one I like is Spider Woman.
Spider Woman.
Get to do a voice like this for Spider Woman, and she's in control of the world. And it's fun, and that's what we do mostly, is just have fun while we're doing it, and then the listeners can hear that it's fun.
Well, the funniest thing, all the voices that we do, Patty's son came to visit from Marble Falls and asked, how many people do you have on the program? He says, there's the two of us and our engineer. Was Pat Piotrowski, who is now station manager and one of the nicest guys alive. Pat has been with us. Good Lord, he was in swaddling clothes when he started.
He was still a student at the time.
Yeah, a good man. And he makes the effects, he does the production, and makes the show the fun it is.
And of course, here in the El Paso area, we certainly have the Spanish and Mexican influence as well.
Every time you turn around.
I imagine that's a very good source of material.
Oh, Lord, yes. Oh, again, from 1598, 1680, the Great Pueblo Revolt, when El Paso saw its greatest tourist influx, settling the lower valley, 1910, the Revolution, are things that really impacted upon or had an impact upon the area that are still going on today, and you have the echoes all around. Here again, today, here, yesterday is very much present.
Well, and many people who have been here several generations or who have come here from somewhere else tie into the radio program because we'll mention a name. And we always say, you know, if you have a comment or question, please call the radio station and call in. So we were talking about George Ratton. And there's a lady here who was...
Sonny Ratton was his daughter-in-law, and George Ratton was the interpreter for the Apache. Sonny called, great lady, but she had stories about George that no one else knew.
They hadn't been published.
They've never been published, so it expands your knowledge of any particular subject. So you might get 3 or 4 shows out of what initially was planned as one.
And what makes a good story? We all tell stories. How do you know that you're onto a good story?
Got a beginning, middle, and an end. You know? No, who are people? When I was doing science fiction, my tack would not be, what did the Model T say do to the country? What would it do to you, George Torok, if you were a blacksmith? Okay, now you got a hook to hang a story on. And anytime story material seems to flag, treasure tales are always good. You know.
And some of the treasure tales have kind of a moral with them. It's not the treasure, finding the treasure, that really is behind the treasure tales. It's the fact that somebody is seeking something. We all have a dream. We're all seeking something. And when you have a treasure tale that also has a moral with it, like the treasure of San Eli, the 2 young men found a treasure, and they said they'd come back together on Saturday to dig it up because they were pretty sure there was a chest down there with treasure, and the young man who had found it came back and it was gone, and his friend had gone to California.
His best friend.
And the moral is, what would be so valuable that you would give up a lifelong friend and, you know, treat him that way? So out of every treasure tale, and even the ghost stories that we share with children and things, we have a lot of fun. And a lot of them have morals behind them.
Well, the moral behind almost any treasure is there's no happiness attached.
Right.
There's no happiness. In the end, misery is sure to follow.
And it weaves in ideas about jealousy and greed.
Greed is at the root of all man's evils, I think. It's sheer greed and selfishness, you know. And there you have a story. As opposed to altruism, where the poor schmuck who was altruistic gets left in the dust, and the other one's in California, you know.
Let's talk a little bit about the radio program. We've mentioned it getting started. When you first went on the air, what was the reaction? What kind of an audience did you build? What kind of comments did you get?
Well, the last ratings they let us see, we were 4th, and that's even counting network shows. We will go out, and people will come up, you know, they recognize the voice, but they don't recognize you. And an amazing cross-section of people listen to the show.
When we first went on air, within the first 2 years, we had 2 awards. The El Paso Historical Alliance awarded us the Award of Excellence for history writing, and the other one was the El Paso
Arts Council
Arts
and
Alliance,
the Community Foundation, and it was the El Paso County Historical Commission.
And the awards just came flooding out because the history writing was excellent, the production was good. We have a better engineer now and more sound effects, and so we have even a better program now than we had in those days. And we have an archive of all of the programs, including the tape, the original tape, an audio cassette, and the scripts. And on the scripts, in the cover of the folder, is the bibliography of where Alex found the information. And then we have a complete listing of all of the interviews we've held. People like Bob Miles, who was Waco Tank Superintendent, and Frank Smith, who was Superintendent at the Chamizal, and Eric Haskell Monroe, who was President at UTEP. People who are no longer with us.
Well, there was a George Torek, as I remember, from Community College more than once.
Oh, wow. Yes. Okay. So this creates a tremendous historical record and sort of a platform for future research. People that might want to delve into these things further. Where is the material kept?
In the house, behind my 357 Magnum.
Will we archive it at some point, possibly?
And a herd of attack cats, you know.
Well, we've offered it to the library at the university and the special collections, and they're working on it. But you know, El Paso, it takes a long time to get something like that done.
Lithium in the water.
Yeah, it should be archived somewhere.
Yeah.
Have some of your programs generated any controversy over the years? Do you get negative responses as well as positive?
The only negative response that I can remember was we had J.J. Arms on, and I'm against gun control. I'm for the Second Amendment, as Jay is. And some postmenopausal lady wrote a blistering letter to the station management, not to us. And those are her views, and I have mine. I believe in the Constitution of the United States. So that makes me a member of that vast right-wing conspiracy, I guess, you know.
But the stories themselves have not tended
to... No, though there was one we did on the pioneer spirit. And I made some remark to the effect of one of those pioneers came knocking on your door, you wouldn't have let him in.
They were scruffy.
They were scruffy. They were rough. They had to be to survive. So one Hispanic lady wrote, not my forebears, you know, they were lovely, wonderful people while they were killing Indians up north, you know. But the point that I had made was that without that character, that strength of character, the West would have never been, quote, settled, if indeed it is. Without that strength of character, the Indians would never have been able to survive for thousands of years before the Anglos ever showed up or the whites ever showed up.
But you know, there's one other type of letter that we get. Now, if you're telling the story about cowboys and they're out there and they're in the corral and something happens, they say certain words that when you quote them, seem that somebody, and because it's in Alex's voice, somebody will write in and say, tell Alex to quit saying, and they quote the words.
I say like that damn fool thing, you know. Hey, it's in context.
If it's in context, then it is the character who's speaking and not Alex. So we have had a little bit of
because if Alex were speaking, would have been off the air 15 years ago. You know?
So we do get letters. We get many, many letters where people say they are interested in getting our tapes. Teachers want them for their classroom. And Alex and I go out to the libraries and to the schools and tell the stories and ask the children to share their stories with us too. And one of the cute little stories that we got, we were at a library and we had a summer program there, El Paso school system, and we talked with them about ghost stories and treasure tales, and we asked them for their stories, and one little girl spoke up, told about her story. She saw a ghost in her bedroom at the end of the bed there, and she turned to her teacher and she said, "Can I say it in Spanish?" And the teacher said yes, and she said, "Me asustó tanto," which in English it would be, "It scared me so much," which is so mild. She wanted to say it in Spanish. And so this is the kind of fervor that we bring out with the children when we share. Alex has one thing that he shares with the children. Alex, tell them about the circle of the spiral.
Well, we get them on the Great Spirit, Usen or Masao, or whoever you want to call him, who breathed life into everything. And he left the mark of the breath of life. Life is spiral. And he left the mark on every single one of us. And you ask the kids, where do you think that mark is? Oh, in the fontanelle here, you know, the whole bit. And I said, look at your fingers. Look at your fingerprints. It blows their minds. Just blows their minds. And then you see them a couple of days after, they're, you know, looking at their fingers. But it brings lessons home to them, as all the Indian legends do. It gives the reasons behind things. You don't eat fish because the people fell into the river once upon a time and were converted into fish, so you might be eating a relative. And look at the health reasons behind it. You see a fish lying out in the desert for an hour and see what you're going to get. The Jewish dietary laws are the same way. No shellfish, you know, no pork, trichinosis. None of the other. That's because of food poisoning. So each one has a very firm basis, a solid basis behind it.
Do we have one particular story that's your favorite? One particular story that you like to tell?
Oh, I have a favorite story, but I can never tell it on the air. No, they're all my favorites, really.
They're like our children. They're wonderful stories, and we share them with people. And I wanted to tell you that we know that the children are affected by it, because when we're there at a school all day, working with one class and then the next, after the lunch period, the next class comes in, and they know the answers to the questions.
You know, they're telling it.
So you do a lot with it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, favorite stories, I think one of my favorites was the one of Carlos Lopez at San Eli. He was the kid who discovered this chest. And then he went back on Sunday with his good buddy Jaime, and there was a hole in the ground, and Jaime had gone. And the word came back, Jaime was out in Califa with a new house and a new car. And again, as Patty had pointed out, the moral of that was, what could be so precious that it was worth giving up a lifelong friendship for? That's one of my favorites, I think. But everyone's my favorite while I'm writing it.
You've been involved in a number of different projects over the years, along with going out to the schools. What other things have you?
Well, fighting City Hall, I ran Wilderness Park for 11 inbreeding years. You know, it was fun. I had a good staff, had a good crew. Saudi Arabia for 2 years, we were doing television over there.
And now you're on the board of the Salvation Army.
Well, I'm on the advisory board of the Salvation Army. Bill Mitchell got me on that years ago. It's been over 5 years now, hasn't it? The only committee I've ever seen where something actually gets done. Okay? Anyone who's been on a committee, you know what I'm talking about. Patty and I are on the advisory board of the Sheriff's Department. Leo Samaniego, who's built our Sheriff's Department into one of the top departments in the country. They're up for accreditation now, and it'll be the first time in Texas.
And I'm on the board of board committee of the Girl Scouts for the Heritage Committee, and we do oral histories of people who remember Girl Scouting in El Paso and other places dating back to the early 30s, and we have about 17 tapes. We look for people who want to tell their Girl Scout story, and I'm going to the National Convention in Kansas City in October this year, traveling with a friend, Betty Petrovich from Gallup, New Mexico, and living here now in El Paso. I gave 12 years of volunteer work for the Girl Scouts for 12 years on staff, and it's been a big part of my life. So,
what future plans do we have for the Edge of Texas? Any
the mixture
themes
as
that we'll be
before. As long as the stories keep coming in, as long as people share with us, we're going to share with them. To me, it's that simple. Photography, video.
I'm working on a web page which will include kind of a list of all of our programs and a place for people to call in if they'd like to have a copy of a specific program.
And I'm a Luddite there. She talked me into getting a computer, and every time it says illegal operation, you should hear the language. Oh, I'm a Luddite all the way, you know, where that's concerned.
But we'll be able to reach a whole new group of people out on the computer. They'll be able to.
We've gotten response. We've gotten response so far. Yeah, gotten response so far.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank both of you for coming and visiting with us today, and we look forward to many, many years of the Edge of Texas on KTEP at 6 o'clock on Saturday evening.
Every Saturday. 88.5 FM. God bless you, sir, and thank you for having us.
And we want to thank you as well for joining us today, and we hope to see you all along the Rio Grande.